Summits of Arab and Muslim leaders in Saudi Arabia this past weekend called for a complete ceasefire in Gaza amid the suffering of civilians there, condemning Israel's bombardment of the region that follows Hamas's brutality in southern Israel earlier last month. So what is the latest with regard to diplomacy to defuse the Israeli-Hamas dispute? What more can be done to ease the plight of civilians in Gaza? And what are some of the potential endgames to this latest Middle East conflict as envisioned by pundits? Welcome to Issues and Insiders. It was a hectic weekend, to say the least, over in the Middle East as regional leaders gathered to address ways to curb the armed conflict between Israel and Hamas. For more on this, I have Doctor Paik Seunghoon at the Hankuk University of Foreign Studies live on the line. Dr. Paik, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Same here.
I also have Professor Mehran Kamrava at Georgetown University in Qatar with us. Professor Kamrava, it's good to have you on.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being here.
Right, Dr. Paik, let's begin with the most recent efforts to address the conflict between Israel and Hamas. Now, Saudi Arabia hosted an emergency summit, including leaders of the Arab League and those of the Organisation of Islamic Cooperation this past weekend. Before we delve into details of what was discussed, Dr. Paik, do tell us a bit about the Organisation of Islamic Cooperation.
Yes, the Organisation of Islamic Cooperation, OIC, is an international organization founded in 1969, and it is consisting of 57 member states with a collective population of slightly over 2 billion Muslims. And the OIC's primary objective is to promote solidarity and cooperation among its member states and to address common challenges facing the Muslim world. So its establishment and its beginning has quite a relation with Israel-Palestinian conflict, since the consensus of OIC has been sprouted after the Third Israeli-Arab War. And it was established in September 1969 in response to the arson attack on Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. So there are some kind of relation. And the OIC is composed of several main these structures, bodies, including the Islamic Summit, the Council of Foreign Ministers, and General Secretariat. Under General Secretariat, there are 6 institutes, 8 specialized institutions, and 4 committees. So the Islamic Summit is the highest decision-making body consisting of head of state or government, government member of the OIC member states.
Right, and against that backdrop, Dr. Paik, what can you tell us about the Arab League and its purpose?
Arab League is officially known as the League of Arab States, is a regional organization of Arab countries in around the Middle East and North Africa, which is MENA. And it was established on March 22nd, 1945 in Cairo, Egypt. So the Arab League was founded by 7 countries, which was Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, and Syria and Yemen. But currently, Arab League has 22 member states. And the main objective of Arab Leagues are pretty similar with the intergovernment organization. So it includes promoting economic cooperation, coordinating the political stance, and fostering the culture and social ties among its member states. So it is kind of an intergovernmental organization within MENA area. Yeah.
Right. And Professor Kamrava, the emergency summit hosted by Saudi Arabia condemned the ongoing violence in Gaza. That being said, how do you respond to what was discussed during that emergency summit this past weekend in Saudi Arabia?
Well, once again, we see that both the Arab League and the OIC have proven themselves incapable of meaningful action. Even in the face of an ongoing genocide and the ethnic cleansing that we're witnessing unfold before our eyes, there's been a marked inability to come up with anything concrete other than fiery speeches and grandstanding. And so it's quite unfortunate that the Arab League and the OIC engage in these kinds of summitry, and at the same time we're seeing the images that are right before our eyes and the ethnic cleansing and genocide that's unfolding.
And Professor Kamrava, staying with then efforts to ease perhaps tensions in the Middle East, what can you share with us perhaps about Qatar's own role to reaching some kind of stability in the Middle East where Israel and Hamas are concerned?
Qatar is one of the only countries that is able to exert pressure on Hamas, largely because for strategic and instrumental purposes, it has hosted Hamas leadership here in Doha. And because of that ability, Qatar has been one of the only countries that have engaged in humanitarian assistance over the years in Gaza. And so it's got the ability to press upon Hamas to release hostages. And so far, we have seen that the very few Israeli hostages that have been released has been through Qatari mediation, and the pressures that both Qatar and, it must also be said, Iran have exerted on Hamas. I think it's important to remember that Iran has also called for the release of civilian Israeli hostages, and Iran is also, similar to Qatar, one of the only countries that has relations with Hamas and can put pressure on Hamas to change the situation on the ground.
And Dr. Paik, amid the diplomacy to diffuse tensions in the Middle East, what more can be done perhaps to address the sufferings of civilians in Gaza who I believe, of course, are bearing the brunt of the brutal confrontations between Israel and Hamas?
I mean, as our respected Professor Kamrava has just mentioned, the cruel fact is, for the time being, there's not much thing to do. I mean, yes, it is important for international community to have one voice to stop the war and increase the leverage on the both party, or, you know, to Israel and Hamas, to stop the aggression. But expert or the people in the policy-making apparatus to understand that the Israeli don't really care about what is happening at this, not only the summit between OIC and Arab League, but in the UN and etc. Because we already witnessed on 28th of October, UN General Assembly has voted, 120 countries voted for ceasefire, but Israel just ignored. So, I mean, yes, as we could see, as we just saw, one of the top officials in UN resigned, and his manifesto saying that, UN has failed to get the international one voice in international community, and the United States and the Great Britain and all this Western power was reluctant to actually put a leverage on Israel. It clearly shows that. It was always a problem of international governments, which international governments do not have the mechanism to push ceasefire or humanitarian corridors. So, yes, I know it's very appalling, but it is very difficult, and it is very vague that there could be much thing could be done within this situation, but. Only the reconciliation or the negotiation could be started only after IDF, which is Israel Defense Force, have reached certain objective that they have planned on Hamas. Then there will be a possibility of talk and negotiation.
Right. Professor Kamrava, Israel has claimed that no ceasefire will be possible until all Hamas captives are returned home. What are the prospects of such a scenario in which the hostages are returned home and Israel stops, that is, its offensive in Gaza?
The unfortunate fact is that I don't think we're going to see any release of Israeli civilian or military hostages, because those are the only sources of leverage that Hamas currently has. And so the ability of Hamas, first of all, it's unclear whether or not Hamas can actually release those hostages. As you know, a number of the civilian hostages have already been killed by Israeli bombardment, indiscriminate bombardment of Gaza. And so every once in a while, Hamas releases figures of how many of the hostages themselves have been killed because of Israeli bombardment. But at the same time, I think it's important to remember that Hamas doesn't really have too many sources of leverage. And so I sincerely doubt if it would be willing, without intercession of Qatar or pressure from Iran, to release any more hostages, given the current circumstances. So as Dr. Paik just mentioned, we're in a very tragic, untenable circumstance right now.
Right, and Dr. Paik, what are some of the potential endgames that you envision with regard to this latest armed conflict between Israel and Hamas then?
I'm not the wizard with a crystal ball, so I don't predict. I can't predict. But like what I said, I mean, it's all the situation are on the hands of Israeli IDF right now. So for the end game, what will happen next is all in the hands of Israel because of this. I mean, the reconciliation or unity or whatever, like the next measure could be reached only after Israel Defense Force achieve its objectives on war against Hamas. I mean, they bluntly saying the permanent dismantlement of Hamas is their own objective. Whether it is achievable or not, or feasible or not, it is their goal. So we have to think about what next. I mean, what is the plan of Israel for post-Hamas? So then, who will be the kind of the mandation? Who will have the mandation of like Gaza Palestinian people? Is it UN trusteeship built upon in the Gaza area to have the reconciliation process, or will it be the Abbas administration of West Bank will just come and take power, or it will be an interim government from Gaza Strip, any political entity apart from Hamas, or the occupation Israel will going to do it by themselves? I mean, all this possible endgame could be discussed after Israel decide who will be the partner for the post-Hamas the reconstruction. But what I really worry is occupation of Israel. I mean, if Israel decide to occupy like 6 months, 7 months, I don't know how long they want to occupy that area. But if that happens, there's a possibilities of spiral of a war into a expansion of war to like the other entity, the engagement of other entity. But other than that, for now, I'm not really sure. But there are 4 scenarios who will be the what do we call the agents of like the post-Hamas reconstruction process. So it depends. It depends on the hands of Israel. I mean, I know it's very tragic and very appalling, but it is what it is right now, in my opinion.
And Professor Kamrava, let's expand a bit on what Dr. Paik has just said. What are your thoughts with regard to post-conflict governance of Gaza?
Well, Dr. Paik mentions a very good point. It's really easy to destroy, it's easy to attack, but it's not easy to administer. And we saw that with the Americans in Iraq, we saw it with the Americans in Vietnam. We've seen it again and again, but this is a historic mistake that people continue to make again and again. So I don't think Israel has a viable plan. Again, Netanyahu just reiterated that the security of Gaza will be Israel's charge for the foreseeable future. The Americans have said that the Israelis cannot and should not administer Gaza directly. So I think we're in an untenable situation. But I do want to take a step back and look at the broader patterns of history. I sincerely hope that we're not seeing history repeat itself. I sincerely hope we're not seeing a redo of 1948, 1967, 1973. And this is just another war. I mean, it's tragic that we're hoping for war rather than wholesale displacement of even more Palestinians. But what we are seeing, this Israeli directive of Palestinians to leave northern Gaza, if we listen carefully to statements coming from Israeli policymakers, one of the government ministers saying, let's use the atomic bomb on these people. I think what we're seeing is a complete dehumanization of Palestinians and a new refugee crisis that appears to be unfolding of unfathomable proportions. And I sincerely hope that the worst case scenarios that are yet to unfold will not unfold in the coming weeks and months.
Right, of course. And Dr. Paik, what then might be some of the broader repercussions, if I may, of a prolonged conflict between Israel and Hamas?
I just want to point out this fact. I mean, we talk about, before this, the appalling and the crisis happened, we talked about Abraham Accords and how the change of land for peace process and how the peace for peace process could bring a peace between the two. But what I'm thinking is, no, it's not. I mean, I know a lot of people say the two-state solution is dead and et cetera, but we all know that is the best solution that we have during the 70s, 75 years of process. That is a consensus that global community have made. So what it is, I mean, if we don't stick to the two-state solution and if we don't protect the right to live and right to exist of Palestinian people, I mean, yes, Hamas might be gone, but there will be a Hamas version 2 or Hamas version 3. Any other entity will just sprung up and take that role as Hamas. I mean, that's what had happened when first we saw the PLO and then Hamas. And yes, even if we dismantle Hamas, what next? So we have to just realize that this economic prosperity will not going to fix the Israel-Palestinian problem. It is the two-state solution, but giving a right for Palestinian people for their right to be existed could be only bring a peace to the solution. So in order to stop this prolonged conflict, we have to be we have to talk elephant in the room. We have to talk about how we could survive this two-state solution. I think that is the only cure.
And
I know it is very hard to be achieved, but still, yes.
Right, of course, it is a daunting task ahead. Professor Kamrava, pundits have been talking about, have been debating, that is, about the purpose of Hamas's attack against southern Israel back in October, on October 7th, that is. What do you suppose was the purpose of this particular attack by the Palestinian militant group Hamas?
That's an excellent question, and I don't really think we know the answer, because it appears that Hamas itself was surprised by the degree to which it was successful on October 7th. And so we don't really know. Later on, the Hamas leadership has come out and said that the reasons for October 7th were so that Hamas would ignite a war in which the borders would change. One of the assumptions of Palestinians historically have been that Palestine and Israeli borders have not been changed unless there's been a war. And whether or not that logic is accurate is open to question and debate. But the assumption has been that Hamas wanted to provoke Israel in order to effect a change of borders, but certainly a change in the status quo. My sense is that it was an impulse to the brutal nature of the occupation, and this is by no means to excuse it. It was a war crime and a crime against humanity, what Hamas did on October 7th. But it indicates to us the untenability of the present circumstances. You cannot indefinitely occupy, dehumanize, sanction a group of people, millions of people that have aspirations of living like normal human beings. And that simply is untenable in the long run. Why did Hamas engage in October 7th? I don't think we'll ever know, but by all accounts, it literally played into Israel's hand to engage in ethnic cleansing and unleash genocide on the Palestinians.
And that being said, Professor Kamrava, here's a tough question. Do you suppose something can be done to ensure a more stable form of peace in the Middle East?
Yes, absolutely. I think every individual person deserves to live in dignity. Every person needs to live free and in dignity. And unless and until everyone in the Middle East, Palestinian, Israeli, Muslim, Jewish, Christian, anybody lives in freedom, can give their human aspirations manifestations, doesn't have to worry about where their next food is coming from, the security of their family, then I think we will have peace and stability. Whether or not there is the political will to give individuals the dignity they deserve is a different matter.
Right, and until that day, then we hope that everybody will have access, of course, to at least basic necessities of life. Right, well, Professor Kamrava, thank you so much for your insights today, and Dr. Paik, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts. Right, well, on that note, we end Monday's edition of Issues and Insiders. Tomorrow, that is Tuesday, we touch upon this week's APAC gathering over in San Francisco. Thank you for now.